1998, a 13-year-old girl set herself on fire after being raped and died due to the burn injuries. It was alleged that her desperate cries for help had gone unheard because of the blaring loud music over a loudspeaker in that neighborhood. That horrifying story led to a PIL being filed in the courts. It also led to a larger conversation about the use of loudspeakers and the noise pollution linked to it. While the court verdict came in 2005, by then the government had actually come out with essentially what were the first set of regulations and rules regarding the use of loudspeakers, etc. Why am I talking about it today? Because the story is back in news. The controversy is back in news. Despite rules and regulations, laws, numerous court orders, here we are today again discussing, debating the use of loudspeakers, who should be allowed, who shouldn't, to what extent are we able to implement these rules. And that's what we're going to talk about in this episode of Simplified with me, Tanvi Shukla. So good evening to everybody who's joining me. These are the questions that we're going to talk about today. What is the controversy around loudspeakers? What does the Environment Act, the Environment Protection Act, essentially say about the use of loudspeakers? Do different states and different cities, even with their local bodies, have different regulations? Why is it that despite multiple court orders on this issue, there is still so much confusion as to what exactly is the rule? And should there be an exemption for loudspeakers when it comes to religious events, religious places of worship, or even your festivals? Joining me for this very special conversation to help simplify the issue is Senior Advocate of the Supreme Court, former ASG, Sidharth Luthra. Good evening, Mr. Luthra. Good to have you with us as always. First up, Mr. Luthra, let's look at what is it that the rules say. Now, the controversy essentially has started because of politics. We've got some political parties from Maharashtra all the way to Assam and Uttar Pradesh who are making this issue. But what do the rules tell us? Is there an act that defines who can use loudspeakers, when and how?
So let's understand, Tanvi, how it works. We have the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act, and under Section 2A, air pollutant also means noise. So let's be very clear, noise present in the atmosphere in a concentration which tends to be or is injurious to human beings is covered by the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1981. The Environmental Pollution Act also talks about environmental pollutant, and that can be anything which disturbs human beings. Now, so noise pollution is definitely covered under the law, and you can't have noise beyond a certain level. We have added to that certain rules called the Noise Pollution Regulation and Control Rules of the year 2000, and they say that a permissible limit of sound is 75 decibels in industrial areas in the daytime and 70 decibels in the night. For commercial areas, 65 decibels in the day, 55 in the night, and for residential areas, it's 55 decibels for the day and 45 decibels for the night. And then we have what is known as silence zones. So, zones such as hospitals, educational institutions, courts, religious places, or other areas declared, there the limits are 50 decibels and 50 and 40 decibels. We also have the Indian Penal Code, which says a nuisance and a criminal nuisance is an offense, and therefore under Section 268, 290 and 291 of the Indian Penal Code, a person can be guilty of causing a public nuisance if he makes noise beyond the limits and disturbs the peace of others. And if that is done, if there's injury, danger, annoyance. Now, what is injury? Injury can be to mind, person, reputation, or property. So if I'm being disturbed by somebody's loud sounds, I can make a complaint even under the Indian Penal Code. The third set of laws is the Criminal Procedure Code, and the Criminal Procedure Code is a procedural law which under Section 133 of the code permits a magistrate to make a conditional order to stop persons from making nuisance. So magistrates can actually pass orders saying you will not create a sound in this area or beyond a certain level. So that's the way it operates. Insofar as the Supreme Court judgments and the other judgments are concerned, there is a 2000 judgment called Church of God Full Gospel in India versus KKR Majestic Welfare Association. And the principle of these and many other judgments is that religions don't prescribe that prayers should be made by disturbing others. While, and in the context of prayers through loudspeakers, whether at a temple or at a mosque, the principle is you may call out people to prayers. And the time when people used to be called out to prayers to temples, you cannot have a situation where you can disturb people in the sense there is no issue of loudspeakers. So again in 2005, the Supreme Court in a noise pollution PIL said there are limits. So in a public place, the source shall not exceed 10 decibels above the ambient noise standard for the area, or 75 decibels, whichever is lower, and you can't beat drums, tom-toms, or blow trumpet. And there's a restriction between making noise between 10 p.m. in the night to 6 a.m. in the morning. There are also peripheral sound systems, and there are restrictions on that. The Bombay High Court has taken a view that you can't use speakers in religious places, and if you use them, take police permission. Similar is the view of the Calcutta High Court way back in 1998 in the context of Azan, and the Delhi High Court has also taken a view that use of amplifiers at religious places, well, there is a right to religion, but that right is subject to public order, morality, and health. The Punjab High Court and various other high courts have taken a similar view. In fact, the Punjab High Court even goes to say that, when speakers were used in ancient, when people were called out from temples and mosques in ancient times, there was no speakers. So how can you say calling of a person in a speaker is an essential part of your religion? Calling people from the temple to the temples or to the mosque, hailing them, may be a part of the religion, but not by the use of loudspeakers. And that's broadly the contours of how the law is played out.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and you read this part out, and I think multiple courts have now spoken about it, whether a use of loudspeakers to call people or to inform them this is time is actually an essential part of religion, because that is often the argument that is given, and the courts have been extremely clear that it's not. But because there have been multiple court orders, largely they seem to be telling us the same thing. Look, you can use loudspeakers to spread a certain message, but you must get permission. Look, you can use loudspeakers, but use it during normal daytime hours. Don't use it between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. or don't use it beyond a certain noise level, decibel level. Then identify certain what are being called as silence zones. Even though it's not completely silent, certain amount of noise is even allowed there. But here you can't use speakers which emanate sound above a certain decibel level. So all of that came through, which is there in the law and what Supreme Court said. Yet, if we see, constantly the rules are changing. For example, in Maharashtra, in July 2014, a division bench of the High Court directed that loudspeakers from mosques in Mumbai and Navi Mumbai, which did not have the permission, must be removed. I mean, essentially they were illegal loudspeakers without permission, so they should be removed any which way. So that the court had to say this, again making clear what the rules are. In October 2016, then special festive season directives came out for implementation of noise rules, again by the same High Court. Then we again saw a reiteration in 2016 December, and somebody went to the court to say, oh, but for Shivaji Park in Mumbai, which is a landmark area, give some exemptions to us, let us use loudspeakers. And the court said, no, nothing doing. Division bench of High Court denied relief in this case as well. When we came back to square one in September 2017, when the noise rules themselves got amended, because the states and local bodies have the power to do that, and 1,573 notified silence zones were actually effectively eliminated. So the government said, okay, if you're giving us these rules, then let's just eliminate these silence zones such that in these places you can actually use the loudspeakers, and all of this was kept done keeping in mind an upcoming festival in the city and the state. Why I'm saying this, Mr. Luthra, is, and I think we can find multiple such examples where repeated orders by the courts and then local authorities have led to a lot of confusion about what exactly is the rule then. Do all religious places have exemption by default? Do you have to seek exemption? And or is it that we must find out what's the rule in my city, in my state?
Look, the point is the use of speakers mandates permission before you can use them. You just can't put up speakers and use them. For example, there are, and therefore there are restrictions that are there. There are also court orders which are a declaration of the law, and they lay out the broad parameters. As you rightly noted, the game that people play is by removing the tag of silence zones of certain areas, because there can be schools, religious institutions, hospitals, and then other notified areas. So if you de-notify the other areas, there may be congested residential areas, and you do it for reasons extraneous, you're really causing, it's really an abuse of the authority vested in you. The fact of the matter is that somewhere along the line, we end going up to court to ensure that the authorities concerned enforce the law as it's required to be enforced. The problem that we are facing consistently is, for political considerations, there are varied standards applied at the local administration level, both in terms of the guidelines that are laid for sound, as also the manner in which processions are regulated or not regulated. So you would have seen that these days there are a lot of unfortunate altercations that will arise because of the nature of sound and altercations, and this is increasingly becoming a political issue and an emotive issue both. Somewhere along the line, this needs to change, and there has to be consistency. There is the Supreme Court orders which need to be implemented, but for that we need good sense of the state legislatures. Perhaps it's time to have a standardized a relook at the Air and Noise Pollution Act, and B, to lay down guidelines which will be applicable to all states across the board. After all, I mean, look at it simply. Can you have in a wildlife sanctuary certain sounds? You can't. And while we are sensitive to the rights of animals, where we are trying to reduce sounds by making sure vehicles don't necessarily travel at night through forest areas, at the same time, why don't we have the same sensitivity for human beings? We have, the Constitution gives us a series of rights. There is the right to life and liberty. There is the right under Article 91. There's the right, Article 14, to be treated equally. There are your religious and cultural rights. But there has to be a balancing of those rights. And that is where the elected executive has to ensure that there's a balancing of those rights, and it's not a case of vote bank politics.
Yes, in fact, what has happened often, which is added to the confusion, is when decisions are taken by authorities or governments, keeping politics and vote bank politics in mind, and not really what the courts have already told us, or what the larger interest, where the larger interest would lie in, which is to say, let's just reduce noise pollution. In fact, repeatedly, multiple high courts have asked their state governments to clarify, for example, what is the rule, or what is the law, and what is the government stand on use of loudspeakers for mosques or for temples or for religious activities. And so I completely agree with Mr. Luthra when he says that maybe it is time to come up with a uniform set of rules that just does away with this freedom that is given to individual authorities, and all the back and forth then happens, and people are extremely clear of what has to be done. Ideally, it should just be as the rules initially were formed, which is to say, if you want to use loudspeakers, you get written permission. It can only be at these decibel levels, and it can only be at these timings, and then just leave it at that. For everything else, people will have to find a way, because at the end of the day, noise pollution is something that impacts all of us, no matter what your background is, what your caste is, what your community is, which festival you observe, which place of worship you actually go. But that's my view. Let me ask Mr. Luthra this question, and basis what's multiple times even courts have said. Should we look at exemptions when it comes to festivals or, religious purposes?
I would put it this way, Tanvi. We have to balance the right to health of individuals with the right to people to profess their religion, and there are not just religious rights, there are also cultural rights. And there will have to be a balancing of those. There is already a balancing sought to be put in place. The question really is when A, people act beyond the contours of the law, and B, the political executive fails to enforce the law. So these are two issues. The third is when the political executive or the executive uses its discretion to really nullify the right to life and liberty of individuals, the right to health of individuals, the right to a peaceful existence of individuals. That's where the problem arises. And frankly, the issue is more one of implementation, enforcement, and ad hocism than of clarity in the law. The law is, I would believe, quite clear.
All right, thank you so much actually for explaining what the law is, highlighting that what the various courts have said, and I appreciate you joining us and helping us simplify this for our viewers. Now let's look at the current context, viewers. What we are seeing right now is that the MNS chief Raj Thackeray has actually come out and reignited this entire controversy and has essentially given kind of an ultimatum to the state government that you need to remove these speakers, loudspeakers, illegal loudspeakers that are being used at various mosques, and the deadline for that is May 3rd, the day of festival of Eid, and after that, if the loudspeakers are not removed, he's given a call to people to say, well, his supporters should come and play Hanuman Chalisa at a much louder volume outside these mosques. Now, he's also said he's not going to be responsible what happens after May 3rd. So, this is the political game. But it's not just limited to Raj Thackeray versus Uddhav Thackeray and the current Maharashtra government with the BJP now jumping in. This issue has become a nationwide issue. And I want to also tell you what is it that various states, their governments or their chief ministers are actually saying. So, let's start with Uttar Pradesh, the other big state where much has been said and much has been done. So in Uttar Pradesh, according to the UP police itself, over 53,000 loudspeakers have been removed and the sound level has been lowered for about another 60,000 loudspeakers. So the past few days, the UP government and the police have actually gone and cracked down on what they say are illegal loudspeakers that are flouting all kinds of rules and regulations, or perhaps don't even have permissions to begin with, and 53,000 of such actually have been reduced. The others, their volumes have been moderated. In Assam, the chief minister has said that anything that creates trouble for communities in a secular state must be shut down. And so while he's making a larger comment, he's also trying to reach out to specific communities with this commentary. In Maharashtra, the Home Minister has said that rules for loudspeakers will be framed soon. Of course, the rules exist. We also saw a comment coming in from the Mumbai mayor who said that we're going to follow the law. Now, the law really says take permission, follow certain decibel levels, and only if you are eligible for an exemption should you break those rules. The problem there lies in implementation, which is pretty much in most parts of our country. It's not the absence of the law, but the implementation of the law that becomes the problem. Bihar Chief Minister, when asked about this controversy, said loudspeaker row is complete nonsense, and that we will not interfere when it comes to religious practices of any community. The Karnataka Chief Minister, on the other hand, said that we will implement the rulings of the High Courts on loudspeakers. So one government which is going back to what the court has said on this issue, and we've already told you what multiple High Courts have said. That being the case, it remains to be seen in the coming days how is this issue viewed. But it is very clear, viewers, that the rules and regulations exist. Perhaps we need to consolidate them and make them uniform for across the country, and then be very careful about what exemptions are there, and certainly keep politics out of it. If the rule has to be implemented, then where you are doing it, who you are taking action against should not matter. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Simplified.
May I just have a word?
Yes. I'm sorry.
I think it's time
Go ahead, please.
people who are our elected representatives, who say that they will use sound to battle sound are reminded that their remedy lies, if at all, in courts, not by creating strife amongst communities and people. And somebody needs to hold people accountable. And my free advice, not that he's going to take it to Raj Thackeray, would be, if you are a law-abiding citizen, if you've been a lawmaker and you know the oath on the Constitution, please exercise your legal remedies. Yes. Go to the authorities, go to the court. Do not create a situation where there is violence or injuries or provocation. That's not what this country requires.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and I hope the politicians hear that. But it's often in desperation to get some political relevance, they resort to other tactics rather than actually following what could be a very legal, legit recourse option. Thank you so much, Mr. Luthra, for joining us on this edition of Simplified, and thank you to our viewers as well.